Hi guys, Max here, and today we're going to be looking at the situation in Ukraine once more, the war, the invasion, what's happened since our last update just over a week ago, and everything like that. So let's get right into it. Now actually on the ground, really, there hasn't been much of a change over the last week, or even the last 2 weeks to be honest. This map here, for example, is produced by the UK's Ministry of Defence, whose intelligence so far this war, let's remember, and even prior to the war, has proven itself to be very reliable. Now the map isn't particularly detailed, but that is for a very specific reason. It's because no one has perfect information on the areas under Russian control, and so this map is really just supposed to show loose areas of troop locations and points of contacts, and the reason I'm using this map is because those which are more detailed are far more likely to have major inaccuracies. What we can see though is that broadly speaking, the situation is very similar to how it's been for the last 2 weeks. Kiev is still yet to be surrounded by Russian forces. Their presence is heavy to the northwest and the east of the city, but no Russian forces have managed to actually get into the city. There are reported Ukrainian army counterattacks to the west of Kiev in particular, but these are very hard to verify, and we've only heard about this from some less than reliable Ukrainian sources, and so it's really hard to know what's actually going on. At the very least though, Russian forces have made no progress against Kiev over the last 2 and almost 3 weeks now. The widely held belief at the moment is that Russian forces near Kiev are waiting for reinforcements, reorganizing and preparing for an assault in the future. Now we see a similar situation to the north in the city of Cherniv. Ukrainian army forces in the city are effectively surrounded, but not literally. They are still well supplied, morale is high, and Russian forces have been completely incapable of advancing into the city. Now the belief here is that Cherniv is not a priority target for Russian forces, so over the last couple of weeks they've mostly just ignored it and they've not bothered with trying to take the city anymore, as many of the units that were initially tasked with taking Cherniv have reportedly moved south to try and assist with the assault on Kiev. Now further to the east with Sumy and Kharkiv, once again we have the same story as the last 2 weeks. No Russian progress into the cities themselves. Ukrainian army forces, while in some cases are close to being or effectively surrounded, they are still well supplied with strong morale, and they are effectively repelling the Russians. Now the belief here is similar to that of the one around Cherniv, that forces initially tasked with taking Sumy have rerouted westwards towards Kiev, and those tasked with taking Kharkiv have rerouted eastwards to assist with the eastern invasion in the Donbass. For the Donbass itself, it's the same situation as for the entire war. There's a large presence of very well trained and well equipped Ukrainian armed forces, so no progress made here by the Russians, though this was probably expected by the Russians, so this isn't their main focus at all to hit these positions head on from the east. Now the invasion from the south from Crimea has been the point where Russian forces have seen almost all of their successes. We left off over a week ago with Kherson, a major city, being taken by Russian forces without much resistance. Now Russian forces then continue to push westwards towards Mykolaiv and onto Odessa, and Mariupol is completely surrounded and cut off to the east, albeit with some very well trained and equipped Ukrainian army forces in the city who are putting up very fierce resistance. Still, in the south it's mostly the same situation as a week ago. Russian forces have made some advances into Mariupol itself, but they've taken very heavy casualties and they are slowly pushing in. The Ukrainian army is also taking very heavy casualties. This does seem to be Russia's top priority right now: destroy the Ukrainian forces in Mariupol and take control before rerouting those forces elsewhere. To be honest, it's been fully surrounded for over 2 weeks now, with constant fighting that entire time. Progress by the Russian forces has been very slow and very costly, and it's perfectly reasonable to expect the Ukrainian forces here to continue to hold out for weeks into the future. Now to the west, Russian forces were trying to quickly take Mykolaiv before moving on to Odessa, but they found no such luck as Mykolaiv as they did with Kherson. It was very heavily defended, and so there was no Russian advance there. Now about a week ago now, Russian forces tried to just move north of Mykolaiv and go around to get to Odessa that way, but they found Ukrainian army resistance at a town or city called Voznezek. I'm sorry for the pronunciation there, but Russian forces were defeated, forced to retreat, which prevented Odessa from being hit just by ignoring Mykolaiv altogether. Now that is actually the situation on the ground right now. As for the losses for either side, we do not have up-to-date figures for Ukrainian armed forces or civilians killed, but both are likely well into the thousands. The Ukrainian army is also not revealing their material losses for operational security reasons. For Russia, they still haven't updated their losses for 3 weeks. They are still officially claiming just 500 Russians killed, which is the same number they gave just a few days into the invasion. Now, the Ukrainian claims of Russian losses are as follows for yesterday. 15,300 Russian forces killed, 99 fixed-wing aircraft destroyed, and 123 helicopters destroyed. 509 main battle tanks, 252 artillery pieces, 1,550 armored personnel carriers, 80 multiple launch rocket systems, 3 boats, 1,000 soft vehicles, 70 fuel tanks, and a bunch of other little bit of kit as well. Material losses there are probably relatively accurate. I will link down below an account on Twitter that actually spends its entire time going through and verifying losses for both sides that you can check out if you want. Now, the material losses listed by the Ukrainian forces there are probably relatively accurate, for many of these Russian forces and their losses have been verified by footage, by recordings, pictures, and a lot by satellite imagery as well. And using those assets, we have verified about half of those numbers, so it isn't unreasonable to assume that those are material losses for Russia and that they're accurate. As for Russian forces killed, we're probably looking at somewhere in the region of 10,000. A Russian state-run media service put out an article and claimed 9,861 Russian forces killed and 16,153 wounded. Now, this stayed public online for about 20 minutes before it was removed. The line from Russia is obviously that the website was hacked and this is Ukrainian propaganda. To be perfectly honest though, those numbers line up perfectly with Western intelligence estimates. They would show the Ukrainian estimates to be slightly overzealous, which would make sense as well. Western intelligence, for example, estimates that 10% of Russian forces from the invasion are combat ineffective, and this lines up perfectly with those casualty figures there. The reason I believe it's a real number is that the article was edited to remove those numbers afterwards, but the entirety of the rest of the article was left intact, and it was basically written around those numbers specifically. The article is still public right now, just with the numbers gone, and I think this was probably a mistake, someone simply publishing something they shouldn't have. Now, what other developments have we had over the last week? Well, the first worth talking about is the verification of about 15 Russian helicopters being destroyed in an airport near Kherson, which is giving more and more credibility to the Ukrainian army and their claims for material losses for the Russians. Here's some satellite imagery of the airport. It was hit by Ukrainian MLRS, and you might note that there are no HESCO barriers or anything in between the helicopters or anything, which is pretty awful drills for the Russians, but this gives us an idea as to how reliable the material losses recorded are. Russia really is seeing ridiculously heavy losses. We've also seen Russia themselves confirm that at least 5 of their generals have been killed, which again is a ridiculous number. This is the highest rate of senior officers killed since the Second World War for Russia. And again, these 5 generals killed were announced by the Russian state. This is not from a Ukrainian source or anywhere else. Now, this is also one of the reasons I believe the Russian soldiers killed is such a high number as well. It's simply not feasible that 5 generals have been killed without many thousands of soldiers being killed as well. Now, as for the conflict itself, it has been escalating still, but not in that traditional way. Russian forces themselves have slowed down their assaults, likely due to their very heavy losses, and so they are instead escalating their indirect attacks with rockets and missiles and things like that. Russia, for example, is claiming to have fired 2 of their hypersonic missiles at Ukraine, which basically moved too fast to be shot down. To be perfectly realistic and fair here, this is more of a political escalation than anything strategic. The actual advantage to using these Dagger, as they're called, hypersonic missiles, as opposed to just using normal Iskander missiles, for example, isn't really very large, and these missiles are very expensive, and the Russians don't have many of them. Really, it seems more like a fear-based escalation. It won't actually help the Russian forces win this war. Now, another escalation that we've seen recently is the use of the Russian Navy to fire cruise missiles into Ukraine. As of a couple of days ago, we finally have confirmation of this from the Russian Black Sea Fleet. Again, this isn't going to change the tide of the war, it's just escalating the bombardment of cities, but it is still an escalation. If you enjoyed this video, then make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to bless the YouTube algorithm. If you want more content like this, then check out our Patreon and join our community of investors. You get access to our Discord, loads of exclusive content like insight into my portfolio and buy and sell alerts for all my own investments. There's a link in the description to masterworks.io, a site that allows you to buy fractional shares of art from world-famous artists like Banksy, which can be a great way to diversify your portfolio with non-market correlated assets. It's completely free to sign up, so if that sounds interesting, then make sure to check it out. There's also a link in the description to BlockFi, which will give you up to $250 in free Bitcoin when you use it. You can also get 9% interest on stablecoins like USDC, which is a far higher rate than you get from any savings account these days. Thank you all for the support. Thanks for watching. Stay stoic. Until next time.